Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today for our session on applying for FEMA benefits. We're excited to bring you this training as part of the first ever Disaster Resilience Awareness Month. Throughout the month of March, Texas RioGrande Legal Aid is teaming up with its partner, Equal Justice Works, to spread awareness about disaster-related legal challenges and to share resources for disaster preparedness and recovery. For more information, be sure to follow us on Facebook and other social media. The session is being recorded, so if you need to leave early, please reach out to us and we can send you a link to the recording. If you have any questions, there is a chat box, so feel free to type them into the chat and we'll answer questions towards the end of the session. The training is going to run from now to probably around 6:30 or 6:45, depending on how many questions or if how fast we're able to get through the material. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Hannah Dyal. I am an attorney with Texas RioGrande Legal Aid. I'm a fellow at Equal Justice Works as part of their disaster resilience program. And I've been doing disaster recovery work since shortly after Hurricane Harvey. I'm located in the Coastal Bend out of Corpus Christi. And I've worked on a number of disasters, both Harvey and 2 valley flooding disasters, as well as doing some recovery work for COVID, and now, of course, in our area, the Winter Storm Uri. I am joined by Teresa Lien from FEMA, who I will let introduce herself in just a minute. So I'm going to briefly go over what we're going to talk about today, and then let Teresa take over for us for a little bit. So I'm going to give a brief introduction on disaster resilience and disaster preparedness and why they're so important, why we're choosing to focus on those things. And then I am going to let Teresa talk about the community services program, and she's going to go into more detail about that. And then Teresa and I are going to have a little Q&A for you guys on applying for FEMA assistance and some other general information about FEMA and FEMA benefits. And then after that, I'm going to give some brief examples of some common denial reasons or reasons people are denied for FEMA assistance and how to appeal those denials. So with that being said, why are we focused on disaster preparedness? So being prepared for disaster allows individuals and communities to recover faster and more easily. Often it's just little things that you can do to be ready for a disaster that can make a tremendous difference once that disaster hits. And you'll see some of the tips we have for you are not complicated. They're just little certain documents that you should make sure you have on safe and in a safe place before a disaster hits. We also think it's important to know about the process of applying for FEMA prior to a disaster, because disasters are traumatic events. They're very stressful. If your home has been destroyed and your property damaged, your main focus may be on making sure you and your children and your family have food on the table and a safe place to live, as opposed to focused on learning how FEMA decides who is eligible for assistance. So if you have the basics of FEMA prior to the disaster, even if you don't remember everything we say here today, because you probably won't, if you understand the groundwork and the foundation, then when a disaster does hit, you will be in a better place to relearn essentially how FEMA works, rather than having to learn it from scratch. So that's why we think preparedness is so important to resiliency. So with that, I'm going to, skip a slide. I'm going to hand it over to Teresa to talk about her program.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Hannah. My name is Teresa Lien. As Hannah said, I'm with FEMA. I'm with the Community Services section. I have been with FEMA just over 5 years now. I was in Texas for Hurricane Harvey. And then prior to that, I was with the state of Alabama as a program director for DCM. And I won't go back any further than that. But I'm glad to be here today, because I do agree that preparedness is key, whether it's states, tribes, and territories being prepared or individuals being prepared. Either way, it always helps through this horrible process that sometimes we have to go through. Unfortunately, Region 4 and 6, which is where Texas is, they have more than their fair share of disasters. And so this is a great program to be doing in terms of getting folks as prepared as possible. So if you could go to the next slide. I'm first going to talk about the community services section and the 4 programs that we oversee. Disaster legal services, of course, and disaster unemployment assistance, the crisis counseling and assistance and training program, and the disaster case management program. So the community services section works with states, tribes, territories, and non-federal entities who may apply for some of these programs, and we help administer and provide technical guidance and assistance as needed. We're only going to focus on DLS today. Next slide, please. We have a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement FEMA does with the American Bar Association, the Young Lawyers Division. And I think the current one, let me look right here. The current one is in existence. It's a 5-year renewable memorandum of understanding. And let's see, the first one, oh, wow, we've been doing this since 2008. And so far as of last year, which is the most recent data I have, there've been 86 disasters, but that was obviously before we've had the year that we've had. So it's been a tough year. Anyway, so if you go to the next slide, please. This is the definition, if you will. FEMA, in partnership with the ABA Young Lawyers Division, provides free legal assistance to low-income individuals who, prior to or because of the disaster, are unable to secure legal services adequate to meet their disaster-related needs. So FEMA is the funding entity, but to give kudos to the participants in this program, the attorneys are volunteers, and so they donate their time, which is certainly admirable. The program period of assistance, there's really no beginning or end date like some of our programs. It's evaluated on the basis of need. There is a weekly reporting template that the DLS providers provide to FEMA so that we can evaluate how effective the program is being, how many survivors are needing the services of the DLS program. To the right, some of the types of survivor assistance that's provided through the DLS program are items such as property and land, wills, estates, and probate issues, replacing some documents, insurance issues, landlord-tenant issues, and not the least of FEMA appeals. Some considerations in this program are legal aid and DRCs. We don't have any DRCs open during COVID, but in a typical or historical disaster event, when DRCs are open, you would typically find volunteers co-located at DRCs to provide services to survivors as conveniently as possible. FEMA also provides invitational travel for technical assistance to a representative from the ABA to solicit support for the program. Let's say you have a state who hasn't had one in a long time or has never had one. So having someone from your organizations to go out and solicit the support for the program and provide that technical assistance is also very crucial. Next slide, please. I've already touched with some of this per the memorandum of agreement that the tally sheets are required on a weekly basis. As I said, is to monitor the ongoing need, but as well to monitor the survivors actually utilizing the services, which may come into play if we want to extend the program. The program is almost always open during the registration period, the 60 days, and then longer, of course, if needed, depending on the size and scope of the disaster. And then the disaster operation will pay for a DLS representative, as I said, to review the program and to solicit local support. Next slide, please. No set or ending date. As I said, that's evaluated based upon need. The program typically begins 1 to 2 weeks from the date of declaration and is maintained throughout the registration intake period and longer if needed, which is where the appeals will typically appear. Runs as long as necessary. These slides are kind of repeating themselves. And then lawyers will staff the DRCs as long as there's traffic warranting their presence or until the program closes. Next slide, please. civil rights requirements, always ensuring non-discrimination for people with disabilities by providing equal access to the programs, physical accessibility to facilities, effective communication access, and reasonable accommodations to provide access, while taking reasonable steps to provide meaningful access to persons with limited English proficiency. That's why a lot of times you will see at DRCs, for example, interpreters or the ability to have translation services, either through the crisis counseling DCM program or at the facility themselves provided by FEMA. And the last slide is a resource slide for information. There's our general email box for the community services section. The IAPPG is the policy, individual assistance program and policy guide about these programs that, as I said, I'm only doing DLS today, but for the other 3 programs, you can find information in the IAPPG as well. There's the DLS homepage that we have. And then the last bullet I put in there because actually I thought it had some interesting information for today's audience on the steps after applying and to restart the recovery process and how to send disaster documents. So that link could be very helpful to you all. And that's all I have on that quick presentation.
Okay. Oh, whoops. There we go. Okay, if there's any questions for Teresa right now, we can take them. Otherwise, we may take questions at the end after we've gone through a little bit more. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I think we'll just go ahead and take questions at the end. Okay, so I'm going to go through some questions and I'm going to ask Teresa some questions, and then we'll, like I said, towards the end, I will go over some common denial reasons and appeals and how you can appeal FEMA's decisions if you believe the decision to be wrong. But for now, Teresa, if you could tell the audience, what types of FEMA assistance are generally available following a disaster.
Okay, my first disclaimer is going to be, as I shared with Hannah, these are typically IHP questions, individual and households who are actually in that field of direct FEMA assistance to survivors. As you can see from the program, I'm in the community services section, which is responsible for the DLS program in general. So what I did, I have some information that I gathered from IHP in addition to some that I've added. So that's my disclaimer up front. So to go back to the question of what assistance can FEMA provide, there's one part of the question that I highlighted immediately following the disaster. So I'm going to focus on that to begin with. So immediately following the disaster, mass care and emergency assistance services are provided for survivors in the immediate response after the incident, such as support for sheltering and feeding, TSA, which is transitional sheltering, service for household pets, things of that nature. But I think probably what you want to focus more on is the financial assistance through the IHP that is for eligible survivors to apply for. So we're going to go ahead and skip over to that topic. So the financial assistance that FEMA provides to eligible individuals and households is for uninsured or underinsured necessary expenses and serious needs. IHP is not a substitute for insurance, and it certainly cannot compensate for all the losses that survivors are experiencing. It's not to put them back to where they were the day before the disaster. It's intended to meet basic needs and supplement disaster recovery efforts and assistance that they may receive elsewhere, as I said, from homeowners insurance or wherever it may be. So does that answer your question, Ms. Hannah?
Yes, it does. It does. And I have also on the slide highlighted some of the different kind of categories that we usually put FEMA assistance into, housing, rental, assistance for personal property, which is, I usually describe as the things in your house, like your couches, your lamps, your kitchen tables and chairs, in medical and dental expenses, transportation assistance, and funeral expenses. And these, we usually think of these as kind of the biggest types of assistance. I think they're kind of maybe a little bit in descending order too. Housing is obviously the most important, and then it kind of dwindles off, the people who get them after that. But these are the primary types. So I'm going to now go into some frequently asked questions, I think, about the FEMA process. So what is the best way to apply for FEMA? And can you talk a little bit about if COVID has had an impact on that, if that's caused any changes?
The best way to apply, if there are DRCs open, is at a DRC. However, as you said, during a COVID environment, you can apply online, over the phone, and during the COVID pandemic timeframe, we have set up document drop-off distribution centers. So an applicant could literally drive up to a distribution center, hand their documents over to a FEMA staff member who would go in, copy them or whatever needed to be done and bring them back to them so that the survivor or the applicant does not have to get out of their car. And of course, all CDC guidelines are observed in terms of face mask and that sort of thing. And so that's the best way to do it. And what was the second part of the question?
I was just asking if that had been changed by COVID, which you answered. So
it has been in terms of no DRCs. The
right.
document distribution centers are set up.
Right. So how would somebody find out where to apply? So how would somebody find out where those document distribution centers are?
There is a link on the locations on FEMA.gov, and I have it here. I can share it, I guess, in the chat. But that's what you can go to FEMA.gov, and it will show you the locations of those drop-off distribution sites.
Okay, great. So what are the deadlines typically to apply for FEMA assistance?
Deadlines, the registration period typically is 60 days from the date of disaster. There are occasions that has been extended, but that's rare. That's typically probably in a catastrophic event, or if there was some reason that a state, tribe, or territory felt that their citizens could not get to a DRC, or there was some reason, there was some hurdle or challenge for them. But 60 days from the date of declaration.
Okay. And what are some pieces of information that someone should have ready when they're applying, either in person when DRCs hopefully reopen, or virtually during COVID?
Well, when they go in, they should have already have applied for their insurance coverage, first of all, to so that there's no duplication of benefits. And then, you'll need identifying information in terms of being able to have proof that this is your home and that you resided there during the disaster. It's in an IA declared area, of course, and that you are the homeowner, or in some cases the renter. So you could show your utility bill, or you could show your deed if you owned it, but some documentation that shows that you own the property if you're a homeowner, and if you're a renter, that you were living there at the time of the disaster.
Okay. So what happens on FEMA's end after a request for FEMA assistance has been made? What are FEMA's kind of next steps?
Well, they begin processing the application in terms of for example, as I said, has the applicant filed their insurance claim yet? If you haven't done that yet and you call FEMA, that's the first question you're going to be asked. So that needs to be done prior to calling FEMA and starting an application for assistance. But you want to try to avoid as many delays as possible, because obviously folks are in a situation where they do need assistance. So let's say in a non-COVID environment, you would schedule a home inspection. In a COVID environment, FEMA has been doing remote home inspections. And then after a period of time that, let's say a remote inspection was done, and maybe the applicant feels that there wasn't enough information provided, or they disagree with the results of the virtual home inspection, then they can request at that point a physical home inspection as well.
Okay. And so how would someone contact FEMA after they've applied? What's the best way to do that?
Well, there is the 1-800 number there, and there's a helpline number which also is considered the registration intake number. They're the same number. So they can call it to apply on that number, and they can also call that same number to check on the status of their claim. They also can go online, and or then you can also, if you need to mail in documents, you can mail them in. But as far as contacting, it would be on the internet and through the 1-800 number.
Okay. And do you have that 1-800 number?
I do. It's 1-800-621-3362.
Okay, great. All right, so I think I'm gonna now take over from this little Q&A and just give some general tips. This should be pretty short, and I'm gonna reiterate some of what Teresa has already said, but these are just some tips for appealing FEMA decisions. So this is after the application process has happened and you have received a decision from FEMA and you disagree with that decision, whether because you think they did not provide enough assistance or because they just denied you outright. So this is how you would appeal that process or appeal that decision. So the first bit of advice we would give you is if you don't understand why you were denied, you should contact FEMA through the number that Teresa just gave to see if you can get some more information. The denial letter you receive from FEMA should have a denial reason on it. And a lot of times that can fill you in on what's happened. But maybe, those are form letters and perhaps you need a little more information about what's going on. You can have one of the helpline workers at FEMA take a look at your specific case and see what notes the case managers have made on your case and why a certain decision was made. And that may help you figure out what your next steps are. You should always submit your appeal in writing. Sometimes people will call FEMA at that helpline and they'll speak to someone and they will think, now I have appealed, or now FEMA understands, they'll explain their situation to the helpline worker and they'll think, now FEMA understands and I'll get a different decision. But that is not usually the case. Usually you must submit that information in writing. So even if the helpline worker has told you you don't need to, just go ahead and do it anyway. That way you have proof that you have gone ahead and appealed their decision. So you can fax FEMA at the number here. That's how we typically get our appeals to FEMA. Be careful of your deadlines. Typically, a deadline to appeal a FEMA decision, similar to the application deadline or timeline, is 60 days. Sometimes FEMA requests information rather than giving you a denial, and sometimes the timelines for that are a little different. You have 21 days instead of 60. But FEMA is typically pretty generous with their deadlines, other than the application deadline. The appeal, as long as you have a reason, even if it's, I couldn't find a contractor in time to get a new estimate. I was trying to get documents together, was struggling. If you can give FEMA any kind of reason, even if it's not the strongest reason in the world, I've typically been very successful at getting FEMA to go ahead and look at appeals, even if it has been more than 60 days. So go ahead and try is my suggestion, even if it's been more than 60 days, because the worst thing they can do is tell you, no, it's too late. As long as obviously everything in the application is true, then there's no reason to not go ahead and give it a shot. So I'm going to go over some common denial reasons, and I will say that we could do several hours of presentations on FEMA denial reasons. So this is a very, very brief overview of the most common types of denials. There are lots of other denial reasons out there, but these are the 4 that we typically see the most often in our service area. And the first one is if FEMA says your home is safe to occupy. So FEMA says your home is not unsafe to live in, and therefore, it doesn't have the sufficient damage needed to qualify for FEMA assistance. Another is, and this is going to go back over what Teresa said earlier, you do have to prove that you own your home and that you occupied your home at the time of the disaster. So those are 2 very common denial reasons if for whatever reason FEMA has not seen proof of that. And sometimes it's a simple matter of typically those things are kind of first checked off at the inspection. So it's possible that the inspector either didn't understand your document or didn't get the right copy of it. or whatever the case may be. So sometimes those issues can be easily resolved. So if you have one of those denial reasons, that's a reason to hope that you can get that denial change. And then another common denial reason that we see, particularly we're seeing in response to the Winter Storm Uri, is insurance. If you do have insurance, FEMA may not provide assistance. It is more complicated than that, and I will get into that in just a second. But we do see that reason a lot, that you've been denied because you do have insurance. So I think one way to look at how to appeal is to just look at what proof is required. So again, this is going to go back over of what Teresa highlighted a few minutes ago. The three main things you really have to prove to FEMA in order to get assistance is ownership, occupancy, and proof of damage. So if you've been denied because FEMA says you didn't own your home, the most common document is going to be a deed. If you have your name on a deed, once again, perhaps FEMA just either you may not have had that document with you at the time of the inspection, or perhaps the inspector wasn't aware of what it was and marked something incorrectly. Lots of things could have happened. So if you have a deed with your name on it, send it into FEMA with a written appeal explaining who you are and what's happened in your case and the damage you have, and you may have that issue resolved. If you have mortgage documents as well, that's another common way to get that decision changed. And the last one, the main reason I wanted to talk about this one is because this is the one that people, the way to get a ownership denial overturned that people are often not aware of, is that FEMA has kind of a really useful kind of workaround for legal ownership. FEMA will provide assistance to individuals who are living in a home and they're not paying rent, and they are paying either the property tax or they're paying to maintain the house. So this is, I think the theory is that FEMA wants to get assistance to the person who is taking care of the house. So if you live on a home, and I think this comes up very often with heirs, you're a child of the person who legally owns the home and title has not been cleared, but you live in the home and you occupy the home and you own part of it, you just don't own all of it. If you can show I'm responsible for the property taxes, I've been paying the property taxes, for years, I have the receipts. I also have been, I bought a new air conditioning unit 6 months ago, I'm responsible for the maintenance. And then if you just send in a signed statement saying, I do not pay rent to live in this home, that may also get you around the ownership. So just because you don't have a legal document showing you are the owner does not mean you should give up just because you've been denied for ownership. So another common denial reason that I talked about earlier is occupancy. The main reason we see this one is that FEMA primarily checks your driver's license for occupancy. So we see if your address on your driver's license does not match the address on the address you live at, you may be denied for occupancy. It's pretty easy to fix. There's a whole bunch of documents. I've listed 2 primary ones after driver's license. The most common ones, at least if you are a renter, or utility bills that show your address and your name. There's a lot of other ones, pay stubs, other documents from your employer. There's a list of documents at the IAPPG that Teresa mentioned earlier. But those are kind of the more common ones that I've been able to work with. The utility bills is particularly useful. And then the last thing that you need to prove is that your house is actually damaged. And again, this is one of the most common reasons we see people denied. So you're going to want to, once again, send in a sworn statement by you explaining the damage to your house. And then you're going to want to send in a contractor's estimate. So in Texas, we don't really have like a licensing mechanism for contractors, so that you don't have to get some fancy, really expensive contractor. As long as it's somebody who's willing to write a statement explaining the damage, explaining the cost to repair, then that will probably be sufficient for FEMA. It should be as itemized as possible. So if you can, go through, this is how much sheetrock, this is how much flooring, this is the cost of the labor, that is helpful. and FEMA will often call contractors. So if you can provide a phone number that the contractor will answer and say, yes, I did provide that quote, and I did look at that house, and I did, see the damage myself, then that is really beneficial. Photos, you can send photos. Photos are less important than the contractor's estimate. FEMA sometimes says that they don't even look at the photos. So you can send them in if you have them, but they're not crucial to anything, to your case. You can also send in receipts if you've already made repairs, showing the cost and what it cost you to make the repairs. You also want briefly on personal property. So this is, again, couches, lamps, tables, chairs. Keep an inventory of the personal property that's damaged in your home, so that you can, keep that list written out. You may find when you're talking to FEMA or when you're talking to an inspector, you may struggle to remember all of the items on your list. I encounter that a lot with my clients because it's maybe a very long list, and you may have thrown something out and so you don't have it anymore and you don't think about it anymore. So keep that written down and in front of you when you're talking to inspectors. And then very, very briefly on insurance. Again, I could do a whole presentation on insurance. It's one of the much more complicated types of FEMA denials, and they can be very case specific depending on what your insurance covers and what your insurance doesn't. But the main thing I want to say is if you did, and Teresa mentioned, you should apply to FEMA, or sorry, you should make your insurance claim before you apply to FEMA. But you may not have. You may have applied to both at the same time. I've had that happen a couple of times already following Winter Storm Uri. I've had clients who have made their insurance claim and applied to FEMA at the same time, and they were denied for both. So in my client's situation, you can submit to FEMA the insurance denial. Now, that will at least get your case moving again. Now, you may still get denied. You may still not be able to receive any assistance. It really depends on, again, what your deductible is, how much damage FEMA thinks you have, or what your insurance does and does not cover. And that's, again, very specific to the individual and to your insurance plan. But if your denial is simply, we know you have insurance, your insurance company hasn't made a decision, so we're denying you, and then your insurance company does deny you, you can at least submit that to get the case moving again, and then see what you are able to show to FEMA. So that's my one short tip on insurance. Again, it is a very, very complex issue, the interactions between insurance and FEMA.
There's one statement I just want to add that I think should go without saying, but I always feel the need to say this. This has to be disaster caused damages or lost. So anyway, just remember that when you're submitting things or photographs, that it always has to be as a direct result of the declared event.
Right, that's right. Okay, so this is Trawl's hotline. So if you are impacted by a disaster, if you were impacted by Winter Storm Uri or impacted by a disaster in the future, you can always call us if you are in our service area, to complete an intake for assistance and see if we're able to help you. And hopefully we would be able to if you qualify for our services. And then I believe that is all I had. So if anyone has questions, we do have one question already. Someone had a disaster from last year, from August of last year, who's finding many of my clients never applied or didn't know how to go about it. Could I apply even though it's been 8 months ago? You probably not is the answer. There are sometimes exceptions to the application deadlines, but it tends to be, someone was in the hospital or someone was very ill or out of the country. And even then there's a deadline for how long you can use that. So most likely it's going to be too late. FEMA is pretty generous with their deadlines for appeals, but they're much more they're a little less generous with their deadlines for the actual application in the first place. So unfortunately, you can have them apply, but I would say it's not going to be, you may not be very successful. So are there other questions for me or Teresa, or both of us?
That's the exact example I was going to use in terms of, if someone's been in a hospital for 8 months, you couldn't apply. But other than that, you're absolutely correct.
Yes, it is. It is. That's a much tougher position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And I think we will end it here.
Thank you all. Thanks for inviting us, Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming.
Certainly.